This is a $50 NAS that I picked up on eBay, and we're going to talk about what I'm going to be using it for, what the specs are, and what we might be able to accomplish with this. This is the HP DataVault X310, and if you're not aware, these units were part of the Media Smart lineup from HP back in 2008 to 2010. This was actually one of the final units released by them in that series. And the DataVault lineup in particular was targeted at small businesses. And these retailed between $550 to $800 depending on which model you got. This was actually the entry model. So this is a 4-bay. So we've got four 3.5-inch hard drive bays in here. Down inside here, we actually have a motherboard and a power supply. This has an Intel Atom. I believe it's a D510, if I'm not mistaken. We will take a look at that and see what's in there. But this should be a dual-core Intel Atom. And then this should have 2 gigabytes of DDR2 memory, is what these came with. And it's a really small, cute form factor. Almost like a mini PC, a little bit bigger than a mini PC. You can kind of tell by the width. We've got, 4 hard drive slots here. The 2/3 of the height is just the hard drives. And then we've got this little section here. It's got our I/O panel in the front. So we've got USB 2.0 on the front. And then we have some indicator lights here. And then moving on to the back, we've got gigabit Ethernet, we've got eSATA, we've got our standard power connector for most PCs, we've got a power button, and we've got 3 more USB 2.0 slots. Now you might notice there's no video output here. However, this unit does support I/O, both on the input and the output side. So there is actually a hidden PS2 keyboard, mouse, VGA, and EV serial connection that you can tap into if you splice together your own adapter. And I actually have one of those adapters. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to take this apart. We're going to take a look at the internals. We're going to plug in a monitor, keyboard, and mouse. We're going to load it up with 4 hard drives. And we're going to try to install Ubuntu 24.04 on it and turn this into a very nice, cheap, and efficient NAS in 2025. Now, before we open it up and talk about it, just kind of want to talk about what these drive bays look like. So these drive bays are a little bit unique, and they are somewhat hard to find. So if you ever come across these, they're 5070-3836 drive bays. These actually sell for a premium if you can find them in good condition. Now, they did come with 2 different kind of colored fronts on these. Some are black. The majority of these were like this burgundy. And it's just a little tab that locks that lever in. And when they were just filled in blanks, they actually had this little protrusion folded up. And you just bend the 2 sides, fold that down. And then that allows you to slot in a 3.5-inch hard drive here. So you swivel it on this side. It is a purely toolless design. Swivel this out and pop in the drive there. Now, I mentioned that this was targeted at home servers, and the X310 actually only came with 1 hard drive in it, and it was loaded. If you notice on the front panel here, we've got a Windows logo. That's because these were all loaded with Windows Home Server. And the way it worked is this bottom drive was your operating system drive, and then you had 3 additional storage drives. So if we pop this out, you can see this actually has the original 1 terabyte drive. So the X310 DataVault did come with a 1 terabyte drive. This actually still has the original operating system on it. So this is Windows Home Server. We're not going to be running this, but instead I have 4 Western Digital 4 terabyte drives that we're going to be running. So we're going to be putting 4 of these in here, and I'm going to be, the process we're going to follow, I'm going to put 1 in. We're going to install the we're going to install the operating system as an LVM. Then we're going to put the other 3 drives in. We're going to expand that LVM with the other 3 drives. So we're going to end up, we won't have redundancy here. You could certainly run a software RAID on this if you wanted to, but we are going to be running 4 hard drives, 16 terabytes total, so we should get about 14.6, give or take, usable. And that's kind of going to be the plan with this unit. So let's talk about kind of the internals. So as I mentioned, there is DDR2 RAM. There's going to be, and we're going to take this out here in a minute, you're going to see there's a single stick of DDR2 RAM, and the processor is Intel Atom, so it is soldered on. And I mentioned about a cable that we're going to be able to plug into the motherboard, and you'll see this when we take this out. But essentially, we're going to be able to plug this connector onto the motherboard, and that's going to give us VGA out. And then we're going to be able to use a keyboard and mouse, USB, to do our input. We're going to be able to boot off a USB drive. The nice thing about these units is they, by default, boot off USB if there's no operating system on the drives. That means if you wanted to load up a USB drive with bootable Linux, such as like MMPOS, HiveOS, you know, any of those kind of live CD distros, you can do that and not even have to have video output to do that setup. But for me, I want to install everything to these hard drives because I'm actually going to be running this as a NAS. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this opened up. And so we just got a little screwdriver here. So there's 2 precision screws right here and right here that we need to take off. Once we get that off, there's going to be 2 screws about right here and right here that we're going to take off that is holding the entire power supply and a motherboard tray in there. So before you start taking one of these apart, you do want to make sure that you at least have no USB ports plugged in the back or anything. As I mentioned, these are very precision screws. So you can kind of see there, very tiny. So when you're taking those off, just be aware. Now, once you get that out, you can kind of swivel this side up over, and you're going to have a little connector. You can either leave this attached or you can disconnect it. I'm just going to kind of hang that to the side there. And you're going to have 2 screws. As I mentioned, they're both going to be on a metal bracket. There's going to be one here. And if we swivel this up a little bit, you're going to see there's one recess down in here. So we're actually going to do this one first. And then we're going to pull that one up and out. And then we're going to do this one. And you don't want to attempt to pull this out yet. There is a SATA backplane that we're going to need to undo. So once we get that screw up and out, set that to the side, you're going to see there's this big SATA backplane in the back. This is attached to the motherboard, and we need to remove this backplane before we attempt to pull this out. To do that is super easy. This top lid, there's a little notch right here that you can press in with a screwdriver. And then you're going to kind of just lift up on this lip here, and then lift straight forward towards the front of the unit. That top is going to pop off. Now, if we bring this up, you're going to see is these 2 clips here. When they're facing each other, that means it's locked in place. Just want to turn each of those to unlock those. We're going to remove the fan header. Now, on my specific X310 here, I only have 1 fan out the back. However, some of these units have 2 fans. And also like a sensor cable that runs here. However, this unit does not have that. So you're just going to lift up and then kind of move back, lift up. You want to make sure when you're lifting that you're not pulling the SATA ports and you're not pulling on the capacitors. You want to try to put your fingers in between the PCB holes here and lift up based on that. You can kind of see there's little notches here that actually slot in the casing into. Go ahead and set that to the side. Now that we have that out, we should be able to actually just slide this whole motherboard straight up and out. And you want to take note here, the power supply cables, they're somewhat of a snug fit here. You want to make sure that you don't tear on any of the power cables there. You're going to lift that up and out. Let's go ahead and move the chassis to the side. We're not going to be needing that yet. And now if you take a look, we still have our front I/O panel connected. And we can see we've got our single DIMM of RAM. We've got our Intel Atom processor. We've got our chipsets. We've got everything here. This is that expansion for the SATA backplane. And then looking at the back here, you can see that this is all mounted on top of the power supply. We've got our power switch, our Ethernet, our eSATA, R3 USB. Now, right here, go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. And this is actually that I/O expansion port I was talking about that we can notch this into. So if I go ahead and put this in, so we've got that connected. Now, this I did get off of eBay. They are a little bit expensive. However, I have a couple of these units and I really like this architecture. So I went ahead and I invested in these cables. As I mentioned, I paid around $50 for this NAS. And this cable alone was around $40. So a little bit pricey. You can make them yourself. But I decided to go ahead and just buy a pre-made one, make my life a little bit easier and know that it would work. We've got that connected, but in addition to this, if you want to access the BIOS, which I recommend doing because it will allow you to set this to auto start up on power failure, which is one of the settings that we're going to be setting up today. There's a little shunt that you need to put on these. So you can use any standard jumper shunt. And I've got one here. And we're going to go ahead and notch that in. If you do not put this in, if you do not connect these two pins together, you will not be able to access the BIOS. You will get a prompt on the screen to press, I believe it's delete to enter the BIOS. It will not do anything whatsoever. You have to have that shunt on in order for the system to actually recognize that key input and allow you into the BIOS. Once you program it, to get everything set up, you don't need to leave that shunt on. You can take it off, but just for the setup and everything, we need to put it on. Another thing I like to do is I like to replace the CMOS batteries. So this one in particular, we're going to go ahead and take this off. Again, this is a older unit. And so with that age comes, degrading batteries as well. So I actually for a fact know that battery is pretty much dead. It's not persisting any settings. So I went ahead, swapped it out. Now I talked about the RAM. This had, take a look there. This has the original HP stick of RAM on it. And it is 2 gigs of DDR2. So you can see it's PC 6400, PC2 6400 rather. Now we're kind of at a point where we're ready to grab some accessories to plug in here. So I've got a USB dongle for keyboard and mouse. You can go ahead and plug that in. I also have a NVMe USB adapter with a low NVMe on it. This is my Ventoy Bootup drive. If you're not familiar with Ventoy, it's basically a loader that allows you to put a bunch of ISO files on the drive. You don't actually have to write the ISO files over. You just drag and drop them onto the drive, and it allows you to boot from them. So that basically gives you a multi-boot device. We're going to go ahead and put that in, a USB port there. And then we've got our monitor. We're going to go ahead and plug VGA cable in to that adapter. And last but not least here, so we've already got our shunt in there. I want to put the SATA backplane on, and I'm going to plug in one of the hard drives. I'm going to grab this first hard drive here. We're actually going to slot in the SATA backplane adapter. So we've got that in there. And I'm going to grab one of these. And I'm going to slot the drive into it. We're just going to slide it into one of those trays. Lift up over here. Slot that in. And now I'm going to slot this in right over top of the heatsink into the bottom slot. Just like that. And it's just going to kind of rest like that. And now we're ready to grab a power cord and plug it into the USB port, or the ATX power supply rather. So we've got our power. Let's go ahead and bring this thing around a little bit. I'm going to plug that in, and now I'm going to grab the keyboard and mouse, and then we're going to hit this power button and we're going to boot it up. Power on. And we can see that we've got our monitor working. I'm going to smash the delete key. And that is working. So you can see we've got 2 gigs of RAM here. We've got our Atom D510 clocked at 1.66 gigahertz. You can see our time is back in 2002 because our, we replaced our CMOS battery and that was kind of dead. I'm not going to set the date time here because the operating system should do that for us. But what we're going to do, you can see this is a full-featured BIOS that typically you wouldn't see. But because we're able to access with this kind of debug cable, if you will, we're able to get into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to chipset. Then we're going to go South Bridge configuration. And if I scroll down, you're going to see restore and AC power loss. We're going to do power on. So in the event we lose power, whenever the power gets restored, it'll auto turn on the device, which is what I want. And if we, let's say cancel there, if we go back, you can also see the boot sequence. And right now, I actually unplugged the SATA adapter when I replaced the DDR2 RAM. So right now I don't have any hard drives in here, which is fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit F10. Hit OK. And it's going to reboot the system. And we are going to power this off and plug in the SATA backplane again. But you'll see that if we don't have that SATA backplane in, it is going to auto boot off of that USB drive. And there you can see we're into our Ventoy boot up stick. So go ahead and turn this off. And then we're going to just take our SATA backplane here and just kind of notch that right in. Let that sit there. And we're going to go ahead and turn this back on. And this time I'm going to smash F11. So F11 will bring up just the boot menu. So we don't have to go in the BIOS and change the boot order. We can just do an override boot here. And you can see we've got network, which is going to do like a Pixie boot. We've got our ASMT device, which is our NVMe adapter. And then we've also have our hard drive that we plugged in. So I'm going to do the ASMT device. It's going to boot in the Ventoy. And we're going to select our Ubuntu 24.04. Boot in normal mode. And this is going to boot into the installer to install Ubuntu. Now you want to make sure you also have an Ethernet cable plugged in. This doesn't have any type of Wi-Fi or anything. Again, this is a device from 2010 that was targeted more at small businesses. So I went ahead and grabbed a Ethernet cable, and we're just going to go ahead and plug that in here. We've got Ethernet. And now we'll just wait for the operating system installer to load. Now you will want to be patient with this. We are running this off of a USB drive. It is a USB 3.0 drive. However, all the ports on this system are USB 2.0. This is a older system that was kind of pre 3.0. So things are going to run a little bit slower when it's running the installer. And this is a big reason why we're installing to the USB hard drives. We're not the SATA hard drives. We're not running off of USB from the pure operating system standpoint, because we wouldn't be getting those 3.0 speeds. And once the operating system's loaded, we can go ahead and start running through our typical configuration steps and letting it install, making sure that we select LVM for the file system of choice on this. We are going to be setting up that drive using capacity of LVM. It's not going to use the full capacity. You can adjust that in the settings if you want. However, we're going to be adding capacity and adjusting it anyways. So I'm just going to leave it with the defaults, and we're going to run through the installer. Once the system's done, we've rebooted and we're back at the login screen. I've already logged in. And so let's just double check a few things here. So I'm going to do sudo apt update. The installer should have installed all of the latest updates already, so there shouldn't be any updates here. So we're good there. We can see there are some packages that can be upgraded. So let's go ahead and upgrade those. So we'll do sudo apt upgrade -y, and we'll go ahead and let those upgrade. That may take a minute or two. Again, keep in mind, we are running on a disk hard drive, so it's a little bit different. It's going to be slower than an SSD. So just bear in mind, and we're also dealing with an Atom processor and 2 gigs of DDR2 memory. So some really old hardware here. So just be patient with some of the processes that are running and with this package upgrade process. Okay, once those updates are done, we're going to do a couple quick checks real quick. So we're going to do a LSCPU, and we're just going to validate here that we've got our D510, which we do. We got the Atom D510. Then we're going to do a free-m. Validate, we've got 2 gigs of RAM, and it did create a 2 gig swap file as well. So we're good there, and let's just do a df-h. Now, this was a 4 terabyte hard drive, but you're going to notice that we actually only have like 100 gigs here, and that's because it didn't allocate the full amount to the LVM. That's okay, because we're going to be extending that using the rest of that capacity plus the other 3 capacities after we get the unit all back together. But before we put it back together, I'm going to do a date command here, and we can see we've got July 16th, 2025. So it did update the time, so we're good there. Now what I want to do is I want to kill power and turn it back on after about a minute and make sure that it auto boots up. That tells me that the CMOS battery was good. So we're going to do that first. So we just killed the power, and I'll leave that off here for a few seconds. And then we just applied power again. And it should boot up if our BIOS settings are sticking, which they are. So that is great. Let's go ahead and hit delete. Let's enter the BIOS, and let's see if it updated the date time in the BIOS. It did. So if you notice, before that was back in like 2010, so it updated the date timestamp to UTC in the BIOS. So we're good there. We're going to hit escape. Can discard those changes. And last thing we're going to do is we're going to let this boot up. We're going to get our IP address. You can also grab your IP address out of your router, because we are now going to basically disconnect the VGA cable, that internal port, and put the entire chassis back together. So this will come off. Everything will basically get put back into the chassis. We won't have video output, but because we enabled SSH with the operating system install, we should be able to remote into the system once it's all back together to remotely manage it. So, but before we do that, let's go ahead and log in here. And let's just see if our IP address is sticking. Should be a .4, which it is. So we got 192.168.1.4. So our router's kind of sticking that to this MAC address. So that is good. Go ahead and turn it off. I'm going to reassemble it. And then I will see you guys back over at the computer. And we will do some remote configuration. And we'll also do some benchmark testing on this Intel Atom processor. We're back over at the computer. We are SSH'd into the unit. And now what we want to do is we want to set up those 4 drives to be all kind of the same disk, logically at least. So we're going to do df-h, just check what we're currently dealing with. So you can see we only have a 100 gig partition basically on that Ubuntu logical volume. But if we do a sudo fdisk-l, enter our password, we can see we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 4-terabyte drives. So this first one, SDA, that's our operating system, so we don't want to touch that one. But these other 3, I'm going to start by wiping the file system off of them. So to do that, we're going to do sudo wipe fs-a on dev sdb. And then we're going to do the same on SDC and then SDD. All right, so now that we have those, we want to do a PVS. Now this is basically going to do a physical volume scan. So we do sudo PVS, and you can see we only have 1 physical drive, which it actually says it's SDA3. So it's the 3rd partition on SDA. So what we want to do is we want to do pv create, and we're going to do /dev/sdb. We need to do a sudo on that. That's going to create SDB, and then we need to do SDC and SDD. Now when we do a sudo pvs, we can see we've got all 4 drives. And you can see that basically 90% of one isn't used and 100% of the other ones aren't used yet. So now what we want to do is we want to do a VG extend. So we can do a sudo VGS. This is going to get us that volume group that we have. So we're going to do a sudo VG extend. VG extend. And it's called Ubuntu VG. So we just do Ubuntu-VG here. And we want to extend it with /dev/sdb, /dev/sdc, and /dev/sdd. That's going to extend it. So now if we do a sudo VGS, you can see before it was 3.54 terabytes. Now it's 14.55 terabytes. Once we have that volume group extended, now we need to extend the LVM. So to do that, we want to do a sudo LVS, and we can see it's called Ubuntu LV. Now, in order to do this, we need to have the full path of the logic volume. So let's do a df-h. This is going to give us that full path. So we want to go ahead and copy this. And we want to do sudo LV extend, paste in that path, space. We're going to do a -l. This is where you're going to specify the amount that you want to extend it by. So we can do a + and then 100% free, all one word. I'll take all that unused disk space across all 4 drives and allocate it to this logical volume. And then we can do a -r. This will tell it to resize the file system so that this 100 gig drive will basically, the whole file system will see all the space available. Go ahead and hit enter there. And you can see that it says it's mounted and online resizing is required. So that's what it's doing right now. That's what that /r is for. And just give this a minute. Took a little bit longer than I thought it would take, but ultimately it did extend it. So you can see it took it from 100 gigs, 14.55 terabytes, and it auto ran resize 2FS for us. And that was kind of the part that took all that time to do that online resize. So now if we do a df-h, we now have 14 terabytes available on our root drive. So perfect. We're now leveraging all 4 of those drive bays. Now, typically what I would do here is I will create a /data folder. And this is where I'm going to store all of my files. Like I said, we got that 14 terabytes. We can run a storage provider. We can do lots of things on this. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go through and I'm going to run my suite of benchmarks that lately I've established and been running on some various hardware. And we're going to see how this Atom processor stacks up with some other processors that I have benchmarked recently, given that this processor is, at this point, well over 15 years old. I ran through my benchmark suite of tests on this processor, and the results aren't going to be too surprising when you factor in this processor is really old. In fact, I'm over here on Tech Power Up. You can see it's the Intel Atom D510. And if we scroll down, we can see this processor released at the end of 2009. So it's now 2025. This processor, obviously very old, very low power though. It's got a TDP of only 13 watts. It is 2-core, 4-thread, which actually makes this a pretty decent NAS processor, even in today's standards. Obviously, we've got things like the N100s now. However, for the time, this is actually a really nice processor, especially when you consider and compare it to other kind of NAS processors of that generation. So we do have 4 threads there that we're kind of working with. So hopping on over to my benchmark suite, we're going to run through all the tests that I ran. And the common theme you're going to see here is that the D510 is the worst benchmarking processor that I've benchmarked, but that's because I've mainly benchmarked, desktop processors. So, and I do have the N100 in here, just kind of like that go-to mini PC standard right now. So, if you're looking for some type of comparison with a modern system, a lot of modern NASs are running N100s now. So if we take a look, the Intel D510 scored on Geekbench single core, scored a 76. So the Intel Celeron 440, obviously, edged it by quite a bit. And here you can see the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 as well. Now, when we hop on over to multi-core, I actually thought this was going to do a little better because we do have 2-core, 4-thread, where the Celeron is 1-core, 1-thread. But you can see it does perform pretty close. But we've got a score of 184 compared to 207 there. Now, moving on over to 7-zip compression. So on the compression side of things, it actually outperforms the Celeron by a decent amount, actually. So it kind of slots in between that Celeron and a Raspberry Pi 4. And so we got a score of 2292 on the compression side. Now on the decompression side, we got a score of 3163. You can kind of see the same thing. It quite good outperforms the Celeron, but it still lags behind the Raspberry Pi 4 compute module. Moving on to YHash, it could not run this algorithm. So this is kind of a hashing algorithm, or hashing pattern, if you will. And one thing you notice here, these 3 at the bottom, the Raspberry Pi, the Atom 510, and also the Celeron 440, are not able to execute that test. So it's kind of a wash there. And now if we hop on over to Sysbench, you can see that it only got a score of 245 in Sysbench, where the Celeron got around a almost 410 there. Now moving on over to video encoding. So if we're going to try to run this as a NAS in 2025, and you're looking at maybe running Plex or Jellyfin on it, this might interest you. And so if we compare that, we've got the D510 at 2.06 with the Celeron at 1.83. So it does outperform the Celeron. However, it is severely underperforming compared to a Raspberry Pi 4. And if we hop on over and take a look at FFmpeg running the same X264 codec, you can see it actually underperforms compared to the Celeron 440 by quite a bit. So we got a score of only 13.39 there. Moving on over to SecureMark. So this is going to be SecureMark TLS. So this is going to do a little bit of encryption on it. And you can see that it underperforms quite a bit. It's about half the score of a Raspberry Pi 4. You can see the Celeron actually does really good at that. You can see the N100 is superb, for price to performance comparison. It is really up there. Like, just comparing to 3700X, the N100 outperforms it by quite a bit, which is interesting to see. A lot of the modern Intel hardware really does well at that SecureMark TLS. And last but not least, we did go ahead and run it through XMRig. Now, with XMRig, on all my tests, I compile XMRig directly on the system I'm running it on. So we're not using pre-compiled binaries. And we basically compiled on that system, so somewhat optimized for that system. And we ran it through the benchmark. And you can see that we only achieved a hash rate of 8.63 hashes per second. This is not kilohashes, this is hashes per second. So it was only 8.63. You can see the Celeron was 25. A Raspberry Pi is about 76. So a massive difference there. Oh, those are the benchmarks. Obviously, this is going to slot in a lot lower than anything else that I've benchmarked, just because it's really old hardware. It is an Intel Atom processor, which is going to be, next to some ARM processors, probably going to be the lowest performing processor that you find in any type of modern hardware. And when I say modern hardware from the past decade and a half or so. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with here. Now, we can take this one step further, though, and we can actually add some utilities to this NAS and make it available in Homepage and some of our dashboards. That is going to allow us to monitor metrics, monitor disk usage, things like that. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but coming soon, I'm going to be covering Homepage, which is now my favorite my favorite go-to kind of dashboard. I used to use HomeR. I'm really moving more towards Homepage, and so I'll be covering that in a future video, along with the utilities that I've installed on this NAS to kind of manage, monitor, and remotely control that system.